stream as well. So I thought we should have a look this week at Peter Svidler in the Russian SuperFinals tournament. There's a little joke about Svidler. There's a film Svidler on the Roof, which is a small joke about his name. So anyway, I've seen Svidler at the Gibraltar tournament. He's a nice guy actually, and he speaks English very well, I believe. So how is he doing so well, and how did he beat Vladimir Kramnik in one round, in the first round of the Russian SuperFinals? I just want to confirm actually, for those on the ChessBase server, is the audio actually working? Just to make sure before moving on to carry on through this game. Audio working? Great. Okay. Good news this week. I've had no major row just before this broadcast. I'm feeling fairly content. The only thing going on in London is riots. Apart from that, everything's happy and wonderful in life. So hopefully I won't sound too depressed. So let's have a look at Svidler. Yeah. So knight f3. Now this is really curious because everyone's buying the opening DVDs, trying to be trendy. The serious players. And we see this at the really high level between a 2739 and 2781. They're just playing chess without much theory. This is, not a spectacularly theoretical start to the game. After knight f3, okay, that's the Reti. After Richard Reti, one of the great hypermodernists, who, by the way, I've done a recent video on YouTube against Aliekin. If you go to youtube.com Kingscrusher, Evolution of Style video, there's a Reti game where he's beaten by Aliekin. But okay, so the Reti opening, knight f3, hypermodern. So d5 from Kramnik. So d5, nothing spectacular. I think it's a fairly simple plan that black is adopting with d5, which is essentially, usually just to get the bishop out and then sort of get that kind of French defense type triangle pawn structure, and then maybe the bishop wriggles back later and black has a solid position. I would expect that to be sort of a bog standard plan that a player could use without knowing too much theory against this. So white plays g3. After knight f6, surprise, surprise, bishop g2. So, what is white, getting from this opening? What strategic trump cards or anything? The bishop, of course, is potentially, useful on the diagonal. So white's reserving c4 at some point to try either undermine black's control of the centre or blast open that bishop on the diagonal later. But it's not really a spectacular start, and maybe a lot of us would forget to play like this as white, or not be tempted, especially if you're playing much higher rated opponents. Is this a way to win games? It's a very simple start, but a lot of people still do play like this just quietly in the opening. So c6. So basically, as I say, that bishop can just be taken out of the pawn chain, and then we get that triangle. I think that's the basic plan usually you'd expect here. D3. Hi Frank Gammett, on my stream. So Adams was saying knight f3 is out of fashion. I think it's always been in fashion. It's just a quiet way of playing the opening. You're not being very ambitious. You're making it a non-theoretical kind of contest. And so we see bishop g4. So coiled spring is another thing. This coiled spring has got lots of latent energy in the spring. I think Fischer in his Memorable Games book talked about that, where the spring can be unleashed later. So we're building up latent energy now with this setup. So knight bd2, and so can you feel all this energy, like this latent energy? These bishops in particular, they're just waiting to coil out later, maybe c4 or e4, and then the bishops are ready to pounce later. Okay, so knight bd7, Botvinnik invented the cool spring idea, did he? I'm not sure. It's just a sort of metaphor, isn't it, for energy, trapped energy. Because look at the contact between the pieces. It's only this guy which is out on the 5th rank here. Apart from that, no one's out on the 5th rank. It's only this bishop. That's the kind of interesting aspect of the position. And the bishop's out for a purpose, because later, black could play either e6 or maybe e5 and just leave the bishop out. Because usually the bishop's bad on c8. So the only advanced piece in this position is that bishop on g4 in the opponent's territory. And it becomes actually, funny enough, one of the major themes of this game, that bishop on the 5th rank, that cheeky bishop. Because now after h3, okay, it's committed basically to go back. E6 doesn't look at all hot, there's always like knight g5 or whatever, and it will be blocking in things. So it's either f5 or h5. So as expected, h5, and now g4. Okay, so the bishop's kicked again, but is white weakening these dark squares? He's not bothered. Svidler's not bothered here. And in fact, he puts a knight on the rim. And in fact, this is not the first time I've seen recently a very strong player as white put a knight on h4, and for that knight to remain there for quite a few moves, because Adams, if we remember, beat Short in the 30-minute on the Saturday with a knight on h4 for quite some time. So the top grandmasters know when the knight on the rim is dim is not a golden rule to them. They know when to break that exception of the knight on the rim. And here, is the knight exploitable? Not really at the moment, it would seem. But the bishop is also, if h6 or h5, then the knight's ready to pounce to play knight takes g6 and force a capture away from the centre, which would of course cause structural damage. And if c4, of course, if there's no support for d5, if that pawn's over there, then this bishop's going to be blasting down that diagonal with even greater impact. So that fg is going to come at some cost. So that's why h6 and h5 are a bit ruled out. So black decides, Kramnik, Vladimir plays e6. Okay, and now e6. Right, so is the knight going to be a bit vulnerable because it is unprotected? Is this queen going to be eyeing it soon? Well, at the moment, knight takes g4, there's h takes, and the rook will be protecting the knight. But as soon as white castles, of course it will be a problem. So white can't castle here because of knight g4, maybe. But then knight g6, hg, queen h4, and again, the rook and queen on the king might be dangerous. So white's not keen, it seems. I wouldn't be keen to castle at this moment. Sorry, Hack Thomas, what is the reason for bishop g4? Does black want to provoke white to push pawns on the king side? Well, as I said earlier, I think the bishop doesn't want to be here with this triangle pawn formation. It wants to be outside of that, and it doesn't usually, black doesn't usually mind, losing the bishop for a knight if he can get a solid pawn structure with no problem pieces. And the bishop on c8 is a classic problem piece, especially in the Queen's Gambit systems. So yeah, like a reverse London system, Frank Gambit says on my sim. Exactly. So e3, bishop d6, it's a reverse London system. Okay, so queen e2. Again, delaying castling. And now queen c7, so intensifying, this diagonal for whatever purpose. This diagonal for whatever purpose. Also, of course, black can now castle queen side, so he's not committing to castling king side yet. And in fact, excitingly, after white castles on the king side, black dares, Kramnik dares to castle queen side. Okay, so one of the points about this, one simple point about this is that knight g6 hg, the dynamism there, the rook could be potentially dangerous because the white king's sitting here. So white really doesn't perhaps want to play knight g6. He wants to at least wait for h5 before doing that. And maybe on h5 he'd take on g6 and he'd play g5 to make sure the h file isn't opened up. Okay, so what does white do here though? He wants to potentially get at the black king. How does he do that? And it doesn't seem as though this is going to be the start of a huge horrific attack now, this next move on move 12, just simply rook b1. But it does mean, b4 is enabled, and if b4, then b5, and then bc, and then c4. We could have some pressure on these points pretty soon after rook b1. Now, interestingly, queen a5. Queen a5. Because this is part of a reshuffle program that the bishop's going to go here, potentially for the queen to come back to c7. If the queen's on c7 the other way, if the battery's the other way, then queen h2 would be mating. Okay, so a3, the bishop goes back, so we're reshuffling this battery. But the battery line, the diagonal is now closed with f4. So queen c7 would seem at the moment not too effectual on that diagonal now that f4 has been played. But not only that, f4 is actually threatening now potentially f5. But at the moment, e takes, g takes, there'll be bishop h5 with the knight protecting the bishop at the moment. So f5 is out of the question at the moment, trying to trap the bishop. But on the other hand, Kramnik, I don't know if this is a major, horrific blunder. Black maybe seemed to forget about the bishop on g6 and about white playing f5. Heck Thomas White, when I see this position, I will say that the black position of the king is much safer, yet intuitively. But this next move seems crazy. I don't understand really. e5, it's really tempting white just to try and win the bishop now with f5, because unlike previously, there's no bishop h5 now. The bishop is actually trapped on g6. It's trapped. So this is a whole piece sacrifice. And is this whole piece sacrifice really just emphasizing these dark squares and the h file? It's a pretty dramatic piece sacrifice. Okay, so e4. The bishop doesn't even have to be immediately taken. White takes on e4 first. Okay, so queen c7. Yes, there's emphasis of the diagonal. Very, very dangerous. And in fact, the check is totally ruled out now by this next move with rook f4. No queen h2 is permitted at all. So the bishop still remains trapped. So was this a major blunder? If the bishop was taken there, maybe there'd be a little bit of trouble. Well, a lot of trouble after the check. Because you can imagine, the h file also, being... In fact, this is like mating, isn't it? Bishop g3, isn't that just mate? Mate. No, it's not. Rook f3, knight e5. Whoa! Checkmate. So that's why it's a bad idea in this position to allow queen h2. Okay, safety point. Don't allow queen h2 here. So rook f4. And now we're coming back to this old story being retold. Is the bishop trapped on g6? Where is black's compensation now for the bishop being trapped? Kramnik has spent a lot of time shuffling his bishop and queen to be like this on h2. Strange game for such a high level encounter. And for the bishop to seem to be trapped in a simple manner after e5. Strange game indeed. So rook d e8, and now the bishop's finally taken. hg, so we have a bit of pressure on h4. And also now there's a threat of g5, of course, forking these two guys, and that stopped, and the knight's protected. Knight f3, so it stops also g5. It can just be taken. So isn't white here? Does anyone have any objection, out of interest, to the assessment here that white seems to be a piece up? I can foresee one objection, that bishop f4 seems to be a major threat. The bishop seems trapped because this pawn's now pinned to the king. But who wouldn't say that white's better? Who thinks that black's better here? Is this some major compensation, do you think, that black has, as well as the rook on f4 being a problem? What do you guys think of this position? You've just munched the bishop on g6. Wouldn't you say white's doing very well here? Or is white, is this the start of trouble? Anyone? Otherwise I'll move swiftly on. Okay. White is much better according to Hack Thomas. Okay. So white's got this technical issue though. You know, what to do about bishop f4. Actually he plays e5, so he's temporarily giving up that pawn he was going to lose anyway. So knight takes e5. Knight takes e5. Bishop takes. And now simply rook f3. So unless we're dreaming this, you know, white is a piece up for seemingly not much compensation here. Not too much compensation. Although e3 is weak, it's on that semi-open file. And it's a target on that diagonal. There's a bit of pressure down here. There might be threats of knight g4. Okay, it's not to be underestimated, the pressure. There might be a threat also of d4. Okay, knight h7. Also another threat on the horizon. Knight g5 to fork rook and pawn. Now finally, white works on this bishop with this next move, c4. Try and rip open this diagonal. Put pressure on d5 finally, the hypermodern way. So knight g5, and now an exchange sack to emphasize the diagonal. Just c takes d, not minding knight takes f3, because knight f3, queen f3, cd. There's queen takes f3, for example. That looks initially quite good, and the queen and bishop will be pointing at black's king if queen e3. Well, it wouldn't. If we follow this through as a new variation, I think it might be safe to take here. Or am I mistaken? Nope. Or am I? It's queen g3, there's queen b7, there's a threat. Queen e1, there's knight f1. So the exchange sack has a point here. Just to give up the exchange. So c takes d. And black, Kramnik plays c takes d. And now simply knight f1, still offering the exchange. And it's not taken, king b8. And now b4, as though... Okay, maybe you know, bishop b2 is on the cards. So Kramnik plays d4, targeting that e3 again. Bishop d2, keeping an eye on e3. After rook e7, the pressure is being piled potentially on e3. But now rook c1. Basically, rook c1 seems to carry with it an implication that maybe, you know, queen c4. And this battery might be useful at some point. So now we see d takes e, bishop takes, bishop d4. Okay, a lot of pressure still on white. Rook g3, no longer offering the exchange. Things are guarding e3 at the moment. Can black break through? He takes on e3. He doubles the rooks. But now simply rook c3. So that was the other point of rook c1, to be able to play rook c3 in this position. So the e3 knight doesn't seem as though it's going to drop off the board any time now, because these two guys are doing a heroic job defending it. So what can black do? He's got everything lined up on e3, but how can black increase the pressure? You might think a move like f5, but I don't know. You know, maybe g takes and you're on the knight. So what does black do? a6, and now queen f2, unpinning against that mean queen over there. So f6, and now offering an exchange of queens. And it seems white's definitely now more clearly becoming a piece up. He's still a piece up, and it's only for one pawn. So rook d2, and now rook gd3, interrupting black's operation to get two rooks on the 7th rank. He's going to get rid of one of the rooks, and he's a piece up. He's a whole bishop up. Whole bishop up. So something's gone badly wrong in this game for Vladimir against this kind of nothing opening, this kind of coiled spring opening, non-theoretical. He's just a bishop down here. The bishop which he allowed to be trapped on g6. So knight e3, and white's just centralizing now. Knight c4, very useful move. So if the rook moves off the d file, then knight d6 and rook c8 might be really dangerous. Why did I show this game? Because this is in the Russian SuperFinals. Kramnik had an idea behind this piece sack. It just didn't seem to work out. It seems to be a complex game nevertheless. Okay, so rook d1, king f2, now knight f4. So white's just a piece up. h4, g5, and now h5, and black resigns here. I think he realises there's nothing in the position. There's no mating opportunity on g2, because this bishop, of course, is on g2. The king could just go to g3 safely, possibly. But the interesting thing for me was the use, you know, if you don't want to face tons of theory, you might be in a FIDE tournament or a tournament one day or a tournament online, and, you know, to remember that you can just play the Reti opening in a very simple manner sometimes, and, you know, allow black to get the bishop out of the pawn chain and look forward to trapping it. So maybe that's one point of this game, that you can play in this manner, even if black seems to play exotically castling queenside and rearranging a battery against h2. This can happen. You can still get a nice game. So very careful play, a piece up, just to make sure no major disaster. Actually, so rook c1 was very clever, actually, to be able to support e3 very soon. So rook c3 supporting e3, and it's a clear piece up. Okay, so let's look at another game from Vladimir. Sorry, not from Vladimir, from Peter Svidler in this tournament. Okay, so I'm just going to get another game to have a look at. So he's had 4 wins so far, if it's still being played. So this is against Alexander Galkin, 2598. So e4 this time, none of this cold spring stuff. Karakhan. Now very popular e5 now. The advanced variation. So bishop f5. And now, sort of interestingly, h4. You know, maybe often is knight f3 and bishop e2, not bishop d3, allowing the exchange of bishops, but bishop e2 is very popular, I think. But here the knight and bishop are left alone for the moment. c4. Now knight c3 again. The king side is left alone. And finally knight ge2, as though now knight g3 targeting f5 and h5. So again, this pesky bishop's been targeted in this game. So knight g3, but it's not going to be trapped in this game. g6. Okay. Bishop f4. So bishop f4, still leaving this bishop at home, and maybe, you know, with the idea now queen d2 targeting that knight, it would have to retreat or something because the bishop's blocking for knight f5. So king f8 or king g7 now becomes possible if queen d2. So queen d2, king g7 to defend that knight on h6. Bishop g5. If white can exchange off the dark square bishop, then these weaknesses are going to be more exploitable. a6. Bishop e2. So there might be in the future a threat of bishop takes h5 as a piece sack, just to rip open the black king, potentially. Not at the moment. Actually now just castles. Black now releases the tension in the centre and takes on g5. White doesn't want to exchange off queens. He plays h takes g, and this knight g8 happens. So is black really super solid? Black's offering that light square bishop, of course, to be taken, but it's ignored. In fact, white wants to get onto f6, it seems, with this next move, knight ge4. Just get onto the f6 square with knight f6, or the d6 square with knight d6. So black actually voluntarily gives up the light squared bishop. Knight e7. Okay, black can look forward to the f5 square, and that will at least defend d6. So rook ad1, knight f5. Is black solid enough? White still getting into f6 though, knight f6. So who of you prefer white here? You have a nice knight on f6. Is this a success for white in the opening? What do you guys think? Is this really good for white? Looks quite an aggressive knight on f6. But you can forget about g4, can't you? It would seem, because the rook's on it. You know, the rook's are ideally placed on h8. This knight doesn't seem too bad on f5. That's one of black's better pieces. So queen e7. And now surprisingly, an excursion, an unusual looking excursion. Queen a5 across the dark squares, highlighting the dark squares. Okay. Rook fe1, centralizing. Queen b6, as though saying to black, you know, you're never going to be able to play c5. I'm just putting more and more pressure on these dark squares with my queen parked cozily on b6. d4 seems vulnerable, Starchild says. Yes, maybe. d4 is a bit vulnerable, but how can black double up rooks? The knight's stopping any doubling of rooks. Okay, so rook ac8. And now bishop b3, as though with the implication, you know, bishop c2 can take on f5, get rid of black's star piece. So knight h7, attacking g5, which is now defended. Queen c7 offering exchange of queens, which is now rejected with queen c5. And now finally black actually takes on f6, not minding a big pawn now emerging on f6. Check. And now a curious move, actually, with the white king here, strangely. With the white king, king h2. Can anyone explain king h2? What is king h2 doing? I think we'll have to see from the remainder of the game what the impact of king h2 is. It's some sort of prophylaxis move. To stop knight g3, Frank Gammett, good point. Does stop knight g3, yeah. The king guards g3. That could be 1 point, yeah. That could be a major point. Or maybe, you know, also rook h1, king g1 for g4, maybe. So knight h6, stopping any sort of thoughts of g4. Rook d2 now. Rook d7, now bishop d1, stopping any thoughts of knight g4. The d pawn is now a little bit weak. Black's got that battery on d4. Bishop f3. Another queen offering the exchange. Rejected again. Protecting that d pawn. So is white slightly passive here? King g8. King g1. King h7. b4 clamping down on c5. Waiting with king g8 again. So is black really solid? We saw this in one British Championship game. In Adams' first 7-hour grueling struggle, black had also achieved this strategic mission of getting rid of his light square bishop and achieving a sort of fortress position like this. That was a kind of analogous game. And it can be a tough nut to crack. But how will black be cracked here? Okay. a3, nothing much at the moment. Rook d3 again, a nothing move, it would seem. Or was it? Was rook d3 a nothing move? No! Out of nowhere now. Bang! Bishop takes h5. So rook d3 wasn't a nothing move. All of a sudden, look, g takes, we've got rook g3 on the cards. And if king h7, then, you know, maybe rook g7 check. And if king h8, then something else horrible. So black didn't want to allow that. He's losing a key pawn here, and he's not testing if the sacrifice is sound. He didn't play g takes h. Shall we have a quick look at g takes h? What would have happened here? Let's see, check. That looks plausible. Say king h8. Actually, in this position, I wonder. Maybe just rook g7. But then knight f5, there's no time for queen h3 because you've got knight takes g7, protecting h5. And I didn't engine check this. Oh dear, I can't see it myself. Can anyone see it? What would be the crushing blow here? Is this the right first move? Would you all agree rook g3 check is the right first move? Oh, you say rook h3. Frank Gammett says rook h3. Forget the check. Yes. Yes, I can see the point of that. Rook h3, because you could get a quick battery, couldn't you, with rook takes and then queen h3, and you'd be threatening mate. Yeah, that looks really dangerous. I can't see how black... He can try and crumble the centre here. This sort of position looks terminal. Check, and it looks terminal. So maybe, yeah, rook h3 looks strong, just with the idea of rook takes h5 and queen h3. Okay, so black was worried about that, perhaps, and played knight f5. But there's been damage done now. Bishop g4, white's a pawn up, and he can now eliminate that knight, which he does. E takes, trying to keep his king secure. But this dangerous pawn now on f6 is just waiting to be used. It's a goal hanging pawn. I've spoken about goal hangers on YouTube. It's just hanging around the goal where the goal is the king. Goal hanger, that pawn. Queen h4, rook h3. After queen g4, another nice move. A super move, it would seem. Super duper move. Which is initially you think, what? After e6, okay, there's not too many choices really. Because say rook takes, you can play even here e7 and just win the rook, because this will be overloading, because you can't, because you're overloaded on d4. So black's forced to take, and now just queen e1. So there's two threats. There's a threat of queen takes e6, which looks crushing because of this goal hanging pawn. It looks like it's going to be mating very soon. But also there's another subtle threat of rook h4, it seems, just trapping the queen. What can black do here? He resigned. I think the queen's being trapped, So say rook e8. I think rook h4. Doesn't that trap the queen, or am I imagining this? Does that seem convincing to everyone that that could be the actual winning move here? Rook h4. The game was resigned in this position after queen e1. Is it rook h4 that checkmates the queen? Correct? Everyone agree? Yeah? Am I right? Rook h4. I didn't check this with an engine. Sorry, I should have. But it seems rook h4 is mating the queen. Blimey. What a mysterious game. Because he keeps on winning with this variation. I think I've done other YouTube videos in the past in the Russian Championship, and he keeps winning with this advanced variation against the Caro-Kann. people strive to play this solid position in the Caro-Kann against him, and it doesn't really matter. He seems to just win on the dark squares eventually. You know, getting that knight, you know, to f6 eventually created the goal hanging pawn. Basically, he creates his goal hanging pawn, and then he's just subtly rearranging his pieces for you know, a piece sacrifice, where it seemed as though there was almost nothing going on. Out of the blue, in this position, after rook d3 coming up, there was a subtle threat here of bishop takes h5, but black's too passive maybe. You know, this structure is very aggressive, this pawn very aggressive. Did black miss out the opportunity after this to play knight f5? Maybe you know, bishop takes h5. He's still doing, or g4 here would be dangerous. Just trying to get the h file, you know, later. So instead, you know, it didn't have to wait for knight f5. Just bang, bishop takes h5. So that was quite crushing. And then the knight's eliminated, and then this nice little final phase. So queen e1 immediately, right, to try and trap the queen. I think rook takes d4, and if rook h4, then maybe queen d1. Yeah? Or there might be other possibilities as well. So instead, to make that more effective, much more effective, e6, same idea, brilliant implementation with tempo. So threaten e6 as well as rook h4. Okay, so let's go on to another game. I hope you enjoyed that one as well. Let's go on to another game by Peter Svidler. So this time Svidler is black. So I'm going to flip the board here. So he's playing black. e4. Plays classically e5. After knight f3, knight c6. Roy Lopez. Now knight ge7. Bit offbeat with knight ge7. Okay, knight ge7. I think I've seen David Howe play knight ge7. It is a system a bit rarer than usual. So c3, black wants to fianchetto the bishop, a bit like the King's Indian. It's got some of the attractions of the King's Indian, a fianchetto bishop. Black wants to clamp down on d4. So for those King's Indian enthusiasts, maybe this is a nice variation to use in the Roy Lopez. Maybe I should be using this. Knight ge7. So d4 immediately though. Takes on d4. Knight d4. Nice bishop. Bishop g7. d4 is reinforced. Both sides castle. Now b5 stretching out on the queen side. I like black's position already. If we look at this position already, you know, nice control over c4. This bishop can be fianchetted as well. Then black might be able to look forward to d5, liberating in the centre. Okay, there's some issues here on the queen side though. These guys are usually vulnerable to a4s. So a4, protecting b5 now. Trying to weaken black's structure. d6. Now kicking that knight from the centre. So knight comes to c6. Now black here, look at this bishop and look at this rook. Black's often playing for b4, trying to target, you know, these two guys, c3 and b2, with this pressure for b4. Bishop f4 though at the moment. And now a flexible move, rook b7. So if needed to protect d6, the rook can swing across to d7 if needed. Queen e2. And now c4. So c4 fixes c3. I remember this in an Adams game with black in the British Championship. A similar strategy against Nigel Short. Rook f d1. As though d6 is going to be eyed up, but rook d7, a bit of prophylaxis. Also d5 might be on the cards. Knight f1, in fact d5 liberating black's position a little bit. So black stands in a comfortable position now. Bishop g5. Queen unpins from that knight. Queen c7. So black's got these two breaks to look forward to, d4 and b4, as well as bishop b7 when he gets time perhaps. Bishop's waiting, maybe it can be used on this diagonal soon. If takes, you know, knight takes, the bishop could be on this diagonal. b4. Okay, we'll go back to move 7 after hack, Thomas. So b4. So there's a pressure intensifying now on the diagonal. Queen d8. The queen's not embarrassed to go backwards. It's a nice battery again on the d file. Now d4. Wow, d4. So black's really getting an active position now. He's ready to take now as Zwischenzug on f3 to avoid losing a piece. So he's got this 2-to-1 pawn majority. White's pawn majority is inhibited by this queen on f3 at the moment. This 2-to-1 still looks kind of useful. e5. Okay, e5. Remember the queen sits on the f file at the moment, eyeing that rook. So this next move seems quite logical, as well as securing, making sure no queen f6. The queen's now sort of harassed because fe is now a threat, hitting the queen. Potentially. Not in this position apparently. First b3. Squeezing. And again, not being tempted to take on e5 here, but in fact queen c7. So keeping e5 or queen e5 now as options. Rook dc1. Rook d4. The knight and the rook were attacking c4, so the rook's also useful now on f5. What about 28 rook a7? Someone asks. Alright, let's rewind for hold on a sec. 28 in this f6 move, rook a7. That would allow rook takes d1 potentially. It might be a move actually. Okay, maybe it was considered rook a7. I'm still wondering about, you know, f takes e, just f takes e. Was that possible? Okay, okay, let's go back to the game. So the game is complicated as well. I mean, after rook d4, you know, what happened here? Now instead of taking on e5, black actually played f5. And now if the bishop moves, we can see almost like f4 is forking queen and knight. So I don't know if white was in time pressure, because this looks like a disaster now, allowing f4. It's all gone wrong, hasn't it? Well, queen h4 pins. If takes, then queen takes d4. So it doesn't want to take on e3 now, but h6, and now there's a threat of like g5 kicking the queen and then takes. So white now attacked h6, but unfortunately h6 is defended with knight f5, and also the queen is kind of trapped. The queen's got no squares. The queen's trapped, and here white resigned. Strange game. There were a lot of possibilities, but my first question is, what is going on here with this? Why couldn't black have considered in this position, or in this position, the move f takes e? Is that a terrible move, f takes e? Is it because of queen g3, I wonder? Does queen g3 on e5? Maybe that's the reason. Would you say? That looks bad for e5, doesn't it? So that pawn was refused for quite some time. So queen c7 instead. And sorry, someone mentioned rook a7 here. So let's have a look at another look at rook. Sorry, not in this position. In this position, coming up. '28. Sorry about that. Instead of knight e3, there's the idea of rook a7. What would you play? What would anyone play against rook a7? Shall we just have a look at rook takes d1 to start off with? Is that a disaster? Say taking. There's a lot of pressure. Is it possible to take here? Because now the queen and this one's on that one, so maybe that's okay. Queen d6, is that possible? Maybe that's an answer to rook a7. Okay, let's just do an overview and summary of this game. It was a complicated game with knight e7. For those that want to fianchetto the bishop, this might be quite an interesting system. So you fianchetto the bishop, not minding white playing for d4. So why did white play knight takes d4? But that was someone else's question, wasn't it? Why did white play knight takes d4? Let's see here. If c takes d4, possibly b5, bishop moves, and maybe d5. Maybe white didn't want this because now there's a nice blockade point, f5 available. So he took with a knight instead. Maybe he didn't fancy that sort of thing. So there was pressure on the centre anyway. And there's this kind of liberation with d5 in this game. d5, d4, and white had an unpleasant position soon after that. After this d4 move, white's position was sort of going a little bit downhill. The curious point here was this temporary pawn sack, which was ignored for quite some time, and the pawn wasn't taken after all that. It was just pushed to f5 to try and win material, trap the white queen. It ended up trapping the white queen. Strange game. Okay, so that was another Svidler win from this tournament. So one more, just one more. We'll go over another. He had 4 wins so far. So as whites now against someone over 2700, Nias Peno, 2711. Oh no, sorry. I can't pronounce the name. Nepon Ichi, whatever. So we'll flip the board and just check this one out. Okay, so knight f3. Retty's move again. Now English opening transposition. English opening. So this is in round 6. So black's liberating quickly in the centre. The old Botvinnik system. Because now black's usually aiming to bind d4. These pawns kind of bind against white playing d4. But white's sniping at the sides, trying to play for b4 to undermine black's central control. And e3 now. Not minding d3 being slightly weakened. In fact, this fact is used now with queen d3. The queen is evicted and it goes back to g6. So black thought this was a useful queen manoeuvre to have a queen on g6. d3. But is the queen going to be a target? Bishop e6. The white queen now goes to a4. So, asking an immediate question about c6 in fact. So bishop d7 defending c6. And now knight b5, getting rid of this knight. So that exerts more pressure now after this exchange on b7 immediately. And what's this queen doing on g6? It's a bit out of play there, isn't it? Queen c4. And now b4. Black's centre is being really undermined from the sides, it seems, in this game. And he castles now. He doesn't castle because he can't because of that horrible queen. He just plays king e7. So I think white's won the battle out of the opening in this game. b5. Queen b3. So now there's numerous threats, but the queen comes off the c file just in case. So either bishop a3 or bishop d2. Perhaps next. Queen b1. Keeping an eye on d3, of course. The queen is doing something attacking d3 all the time. And black doesn't mind losing a7 here because he's winning b5. But I think white has the central control potential now and potential for d4. White has the centre coming up. So rook a3. Now d4. Nice move in the centre using that extra central pawn. And there's problems to deal with. Black deals with them tactically now. Knight a6 attacking the queen. So indirectly defending c5. Queens do come off. Bishop f4. So this extra central pawn now. Look at these raking bishops. And look at this one over there. So white's pieces are ready to like dominate the centre and the files and stuff like that. They're ready for action. So bishop c7. Now knight d3. White's won the battle with the centre here, I think. And look at this offside knight. White's knight on f4 is very beautiful and functional. There's an immediate threat of rook e1 just winning the bishop. Bishop humbly retreats. Horrible looking pieces. White's totally won the battle of the centre from this English opening. Check. Now doubling up rooks in comfort to be able to play rook e7. Start doing the damage by attacking two weaknesses at the same time potentially. But no, a change of plan now. Rook b1 and rook c3. So quick versatility of the rooks being demonstrated. An immediate threat of rook takes c6 and rook takes b8 is introduced. So bishop f5 protecting against rook c6. But rook b6 and now there's an immediate threat of d5 winning that poor knight. The king in the centre can't be good here. So rook b5 hitting the bishop on f5. That's the move. And now d5 winning a piece finally. What a total disaster from the opening really. The like decentralization of black. He was dismembered from the central control. And now he's just losing a piece. So whole piece up. And here black resigned. So that was a beautifully played English opening, starting with Reti, with Reti's knight f3 move. Let's quickly review that in summary. So there was a real battle for the central control and undermining of the Botvinnik setup here by Svidler. There was an interesting excursion with the black queen via d3 to g6. Didn't seem that effective from the evidence of the game. The queen on g6. So white got on with... this was a very interesting idea, knight b5. Because eventually it just exerted more pressure on black and stopped black actually like castling with that queen on c4. So the centre is kind of undermined by white. And black started falling to bits after this d4. Even after the queen's come off, white's pieces are so much superior here, and the king's still in the centre. The knight was actually a major tactical target now, with rook takes c6, and it ended up being lost now. Okay, so those were 4 of Svidler's wins, which I've briefly gone through. I'll put this video on YouTube if you want to review it and maybe engine analyze it in your own time for other variations. We've just sort of gone through them quite rapidly. Hope you enjoyed this week. If there's any comments or questions, I'll be here for a minute or two. Otherwise, thanks, and see you next week. Okay. Thanks very much.